Another quiet night at the office. No phone calls, no messages, nothing but junk mail and overdue bills to keep me company. Seems nobody wants to hire a real private dick anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics.
We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to you.
All right, folks, welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. I'm Joe Mangiacotti, and joining me on today's edition, George Landreth, president of Frontiers of Freedom, as we broadcast live from the Frontiers of Freedom studios in Washington, D.C. You can join the conversation over the next hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Don't forget our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388. 617-297-8388. You can join the conversation via text like you'd text anywhere else. It appears on the screen in the studio in real time, and we try to work it into the conversation. You can also listen to the station 24/7 on the TuneIn app. We stream it there, as do thousands of other radio stations. So do me a favor, download it. If you don't have it on your device, take seconds to do that. Punch in WCRN. You'll see our really cool logo there. Do me a favor, hit the like button. We know you're there. And, of course, we're easy to find. Now, I stream my show on multiple platforms, so you can watch and listen live on X or Facebook or Twitch TV, Joe Mangiacotti Show. That's my tag, I guess you say, on social media, MANGI, Joe Mangiacotti Show, or you can watch it on LinkedIn profile and, of course, live on Rumble, the Joe Mangiacotti channel on Rumble TV. It's later loaded up to Torch TV, a new streaming channel that you can find on your Roku, Fire Stick, or Smart TV. So multiple ways to watch, multiple ways to listen, including the WCRN Facebook page and the YouTube channel. So let me welcome George Landreth, president of the Frontiers of Freedom, it's your studio, George, actually. So thank you.
It's your show, though.
Thank you for lending the studio and joining me for today's edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. And we are broadcasting, George is broadcast on the Weekly Report from this studio. You know, I joined from the Cameo studio in Boston, and Tom is in Iowa, and Dr. Larry would be on his farm when he does join us. So we are able to come from all points when we do that. And thanks for lending the studio. We have an event in Washington tonight. We'll be at the Irish ambassador's residence this evening, and we've got some meetings tomorrow. So Peter Bloop will be sitting in for me tomorrow's edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. But in the interim, you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. Lines are open and available. And George, I obviously think we have to acknowledge today works out in a couple ways for us, but mainly because it is the 100th day of the Trump's second administration. And what's interesting is it was Franklin Roosevelt who made the first 100 days a thing, right? It wasn't a thing before 1932, July 25th, 1932. He began a speech with the first 100 days, and times were tough, economic times and things of that nature. And he decided that it's time to take a moment to reflect, right, and see where we are. And that, ever since then, so pushing 100 years now, the first 100 days has become a thing. And it's used to gauge how effective or how good this president's going to be. Now, I think Trump might define it a little bit to the first 30 days, right? I mean, I think he accomplished in the first 30 days more than most presidents have. So what's your assessment on the first 100 days of the Trump administration?
Well, I used to run track in high school and college, and I would say that he started off at a really fast pace.
Yeah.
And, he came out of the blocks hard and is really moving. So I feel like lots of good things are happening. Now, of course, there's still more to do because, to be honest, the 4 years of Joe Biden's presidency was disastrous. Economically, on national security, you name it. There was really no good news coming out of that presidency. And And so he's working hard to fix things. And I think he's making progress. But to act as if he should have it all done in 100 days is a little bit nutty. It's kind of like if your house was burned to the ground, do you think you could rebuild it in a month or two? Probably not. It takes a little longer. That's kind of the way it works. So anyhow, I think it's a very interesting kind of reality, which is, I think he's done a very good job, but I also feel like there's a lot more to do. But if you're looking at a race, he's jumped out to a big lead.
Yeah, and that lends the conversation to another aspect, is the amount of criticism for how things are moving, or not moving. And I think it's so hypocritical for media and leftist pundits to be calling things out like the day after he's inaugurated that the price of eggs are still high. To George's point, will you give him a chance to, change his suit? I mean, Al Green's filing impeachment orders again, like they did in the first term. The point is, let's look at this, right? Tariffs have people worried. The price of eggs, in fact, have come down quite a bit, right? And oil has come down. Fuel, energy's come down. Inflation, we had a bit of deflation, actually. So the tariffs seem to have a lot of people very worried. Now, the interesting thing is, George, you just did a white paper on tariffs, which I read, which is fantastic. And one of the things in there that, I've alluded to before, but I think we need to drive home, is tariffs can be a very effective and complex tool, can it not?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not real smart to be for 100% tariffs all the time, and it's also not real smart to be anti-tariff all the time, because it's, in some regard, it might be, you can make the analogy that it's like oncology treatments, like radiation treatment or something like that. Not a lot of fun. You don't really want to do that unless you need it. But when you need it, it's important and it can save your life. And I would argue that that's the way that I see tariffs as an important tool. But in general, we probably want to have good trade agreements where we have very low or near zero tariffs, at least with our friends and our allies. Not saying that's what you want to do with people who, if they make money, will use said money to attack you or to try to overturn you or kill your sons and daughters in the battlefield.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, it's not going to happen overnight either. For one thing, and I've talked about this before, folks, is Donald Trump, he's resetting the world stage on many levels. And one of them is the trade balances, the economy. And if you don't take comfort in that, take comfort in, the man has been talking about this for 40 years. You can go back to Jay Leno shows, or even Conan O'Brien, and even when he was welcomed and they were thrilled to have him on The View, believe it or not, he would talk about how America was getting screwed over by tariffs and the inequity of these trade balances. So it's something he's very familiar with, something he's been talking about for a long time. And if you look at Donald Trump's style, and if you're not sure what it is, maybe you need to go back and remember the first term and go watch some old Celebrity Apprentices. You kind of see how he works at things. And this is a tool, and it's not going to happen overnight. But what it has done, it has made tens of nations, even hundreds of nations, actually say, oh, wait a minute, can we talk about this first? Can we make a deal? Even to the point that there are some nations that have had deals in place, say, with China. And they're willing to unwrap some of those deals or to supersede them with new deals. So he's using them, I guess the word, right, strategically.
Yeah, I would agree.
He's strategically using them.
Yeah, if you, like you mentioned, if you look at the history, if you look in his first term, he threatened both Mexico and Canada with tariffs. So what did he do? He got a better trade agreement than NAFTA with lower tariffs. There's still some tariffs out there that are not as low as they ought to be. And so he's repeating and rinse, repeat, But the bottom line is, it seems to me he is very focused not so much on imposing tariffs on everybody, but using them to get better trade deals for America. And then on top of that, like I say in my white paper, there's some nations that if they make money off of America, that money will be turned around and used to attack us and our allies. An example would be both Biden and Barack Obama gave pallets of cash to Iran. What did they do with that money? They didn't feed their people. They didn't free their people. They used it to fund terrorism around the globe and to kill Americans and to kill our friends and allies. And so it's like, why would you want to have a trade deal with a country that if they make money is going to simply use it to kill you? Saying you can look at, Russia and China the same way. Yeah. They have bad intentions. And so if they make money, all it's going to do is make their military goals more achievable.
Yeah, and I really think you can see developing the same strategy that Donald Trump used in his first term, say with Iran, right, where he was striking these deals with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. I mean, we were looking at direct flight from Israel to Saudi Arabia. Who would have thought that was happening? That was part of the Abraham Accord. So I think what you're going to see here is many deals struck with Philippines, with Taiwan, with all of the Indonesia countries. He's basically going to surround China and Russia, for that matter, with these trade deals, which these countries absolutely want to. They need to, right? We're responsible for over 60% of the world's purchasing. Yeah. We're a juggernaut on that. Now, China may have population, but the average citizen doesn't have the wealth or the spending power that we do collectively as a nation, right?
Exactly.
So they need to have a deal with this. So, and I said at the beginning of this whole trade thing, and I'll say it again, nobody can outlast any kind of a trade standoff as well as we can. And it could be uncomfortable for a little while. But please take a look at the bigger picture. You got to take the 30,000-foot view of this and what's going to be better. Not only is the tariffs and the trade that's going to work, George, right? We have to look at the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And we have to look at, too much of our pharmaceuticals come from China. And we're striking India, I know, is as you mentioned earlier when we talked about this, India is going to be a great ally and replacement for a lot of this manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that'll also give us time to bring our supply chains closer to home, because that takes time to transition and you don't want to create these huge shocks. So, for example, going from China to India is a huge plus. And if we want to get closer to home, we can, but it's going to take some time, and we have to be sure that we don't have a 3-year lapse.
Yeah. All right, folks, this is the Tuesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. We're broadcasting from the Frontiers of Freedom TV studios in Washington, D.C. George Landreth, president of the Frontiers of Freedom, is joining me today. Our line's open and available at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Stick with us, folks, and we'll be back on the other side. 2 and 10, folks.
This thing again.
Hi, this is Phil George, the biochemist from Wellness Wave Radio. I don't recommend anyone that I don't do business with myself. So I'm glad that I found Doug at Meineke Car Center in Worcester. Since Meineke is a national company, the warranty will be honored by other Meineke shops nationwide. Just call 774-530-9009.
More
an appointment online. Meineke, 61 Park Avenue, Worcester. Keeping your wheels on the road.
Aspect of trade should.
This is Jerry Doherty, host of Making Money Last, right here on WCRN. Like all business owners, I'm interested in why people choose to work with independence group. So I asked my clients. The most common response: Jerry does not try to be all things to all people. Boston Independence Group is specialized focused solely on retirement planning. My customers enjoy the difference. We do one thing, and we do it well. Help other people live better in retirement. That's it. If you're ready to retire or making plans to retire, we can do for you what we've done for hundreds of other retirees throughout New England. Live better in retirement. Just give me a call. I'll show you how. My toll-free number is 877-772-1776. Again, that number is 877-772-1776. And you can visit us on the web at bostonindependencegroup.com. bostonindependencegroup.com.
Ziti's Italia Ristorante is where to make Mother's Day a lasting memory. Show your mother that you understand. You finally understand. A mother's love is just like a fine meal prepared by an authentic Italian trattoria. Ziti's menu will offer your mother a selection of ethereal Epicurean delights. Come eat at Ziti's restaurant on Route 9 East in Westboro. Your mother will love it. Make it Mother's Day at Ziti's Italian Ristorante, Route 9 East in Westboro.
All right, folks, welcome back to the second segment of the Tuesday afternoon edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Don't forget, you can join the conversation for the remainder of the hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. And, of course, our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388. Don't forget, I am streaming on my social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show, M-A-N-G-I. That's Facebook, X, LinkedIn, as well as Twitch TV, and, of course, on Rumble. Rumble and the Joe Mangiacotti Show channel. We also stream on the station's Facebook page. And do me a favor, if you haven't done it already, go visit the station Facebook page at AM 830 WCRN. Do me a favor, hit the like button, follow us there as we increase the content there. Of course, I stream there. The Carr Brothers are now streaming there, and they're on Fridays at 1, and Health Freedom Radio is picking it up. So we're going to have more and more people adding content to the station Facebook page. But for now, you can go there on my Facebook page, again, Rumble TV. And don't forget to go check out Torch TV as well. As I broadcast from Washington, D.C. today, George Landreth, president of the Frontiers of Freedom Institute, joins me here in studio. It's actually his studio that we're broadcasting from. And George, just real quick, the Frontiers of Freedom, a little bit of the history of it. It began back with Senator Wallop. And how did this kick off, and what is the mission of the... And we're commonly, this is what they commonly refer to as a think tank, which, you know, some might look at us and say, well, that's very contradictory. but we are a think tank out of D.C. and how did it come about, and what's a little bit of the history?
Well, Senator Malcolm Wallop was a 3-term senator from Wyoming, and he was going to be retiring from the Senate because he felt like, you know, he served his time and it was time to move on.
Wow, man of principles.
Yeah.
Wow.
But he also didn't want to just back out of public policy. He wanted to continue to advocate for and work for constitutional government and freedom and opportunity for all and those kinds of things, and peace through strength. So he founded Frontiers of Freedom Institute, and then he one day I got a call on the phone from him, and he asked me if I'd be willing to have lunch with him to discuss becoming the president of the institute. So I was honored to talk to him because he was somebody I really respected a lot because I'd followed his career, and he was a smart senator. He was also a principled senator, and you know, I liked that. So the idea of working with him or working for him was a big deal. And so, you know, we basically work to promote freedom and opportunity for all wherever we can. We try to promote peace through strength, the idea that we need to be secure as a nation, we need to be prosperous as a nation, and that individuals, as our founding fathers said, have inalienable rights, which means those rights are not subject to being taken away. You know, we have example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, those kinds of things. We're not going to vote on that. We're not going to vote on whether or not, you know, Joe goes to the right church or I go to the right church, or if we have to go to church, or if we can stay home if we want. Those are personal choices, and our founders guaranteed that because they saw those as inalienable rights. In other words, it's none of the majority's business.
And of course, he was actually very good friends with Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
And he was in the Senate during the Reagan years. And what year did he leave the Senate?
96.
And what year did Frontiers of Freedom was founded?
Well, it was founded right before he left.
All
so
right,
I think,
right there, 95, 96.
Yeah, 95, 96 timeframe. And he, as you said, he was friends with Ronald Reagan. And in the mid to late 70s, he had a breakfast with Paul Laxalt, Ronald Reagan, and himself, just the three of them together. Paul Laxalt was another conservative senator from Nevada at the time. And that's where he introduced him to the concept of missile defense. And Ronald Reagan immediately caught the vision of it, because one of the things that Malcolm told me was, oftentimes when you talk to people about missile defense, because you realize this is the 70s, they were like, that's crazy talk. You can't do that. How could you possibly shoot down missiles? That's just stupid. You're being crazy. But Ronald Reagan immediately understood why it was important.
Yeah.
And he, of course, and when he gave a speech on missile defense, he pointed out, why would we want to just simply have our only defense be, if you nuke us, we'll nuke you back?
Yeah.
Well, how about we make it so they can't nuke us in the first place?
Yeah.
And that was exactly what Malcolm Wallop wanted too, was a safer nation, because they say that one nuclear missile can ruin your whole day.
Yeah, absolutely. Depends what time of day it is, but
Yeah.
boy, it can. But the thing is, of course, Ronald Reagan of the Reagan years, pretty famous for, infamous, I guess how you look at it, for Star Wars. And Star Wars, I think it, because you have a lot of experience and a lot of access to briefs and security and defense that most of us don't get, because you're invited to some of these briefings. But we had some really incredible technology in the 80s, but I think Reagan did a very good job of framing it to convince the Russians at the time that we had capability far beyond maybe what we did. Although we did have, some ability, and we could do that. But he had them convinced, and I think it was had a lot to do with moving us towards the end of the Cold War, is them really thinking that their missile system could be defenseless from us, that we could knock them out. Of course, we also starved them to death in essence, right? They had great, they'd line up their tanks, but they couldn't put fuel in the tanks. So Reagan's other part of that formula was to outspend them, and just simply wait them out on it. And I'll never forget this article I read, and I haven't asked you about this, I don't think. But one of the things that we discovered after the fall of the Soviet Union, and we were able to get access to some KGB files and so forth, one of the things that really made Russia come to the table in the latter 80s there, and end the Cold War, and of course the wall coming down in Berlin and all that, was the fact that Reagan fired the air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
And that did send shockwaves around the world, because at that time the Soviets were thinking, if he'll fire the air traffic controllers in the United States runs on its airlines, and it's such a big thing, maybe he'll do anything. And if he thinks it's the right thing to do, he doesn't seem to be pressured by political fallout. And I think, hear me out on this, that some of that kind of actions and belief transfers to Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of countries, including Putin, looks at Donald Trump and says, we're not sure, because he doesn't behave like a traditional politician. He doesn't seem to buckle. Look at the pressure this man's been under, and he hasn't buckled.
Yeah.
And if he thinks it's the right thing, and more importantly, if it's the right thing for the United States of America, right? Yeah. I think they know, we don't know what he'll do. He'll do what he thinks is right. So I think that had to play. But back to Frontiers of Freedom. So it's been in existence, we're pushing 30 years then.
Yeah, we're getting very close. It'll be, I guess, next year it will be our 30th year. So,
and you've been at the helm for that entire time?
Well, the first 2 years they were kind of starting up, and so no, I was not then. I came on in very early 1999.
Okay, and the mission is still the same today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And how do we achieve some of that?
Well, it's a little bit like a toolbox. We have a lot of different tools. Some of them are things like shows that we try to, if you will, educate the public so they know more about their Constitution, their legacy of freedom and opportunity, those kinds of things. These important issues like tariffs and missile defense and peace through strength, those kinds of things. And then, of course, we write articles, we write white papers that are very in depth. And then we hold conferences. We've had conferences on Capitol Hill with, for example, secretaries of defense and others, major leaders to discuss things like missile defense and so forth. And then we also will do, if we've created ads to try to get the American public aware of things, like we talked about the importance of religious freedom and the importance of why that actually matters. Even if you're not religious, you ought to be for religious freedom, because part of that is they can
forcing you to.
Exactly. There have been societies in which you are forced to be religious, and in America, that's not a requirement. And so on some level, our goal is to help Americans have an appreciation for our Constitution and the idea of freedom and prosperity and security.
See, and I take the freedom of speech as an important aspect to the discussion or debate on, say, transgenderism. And that is that, we actually have communities who are making it laws to misgender somebody, right? Or to accidentally. And my feeling on that is that community, that's the activists of the community, and I'm being respectful. I don't want to insult them. That's not a goal here. But that activist community wants to actually require us to use certain terminology. And I argue that freedom of speech not only means that you can say anything short of fire in a crowded theater, but it means you can't be compelled to say something either, nor can you be compelled to go to a church. You have the right to be an atheist, right?
Exactly.
So they've changed the language or the meaning of words. And I didn't get the memo. I didn't get the meeting. I didn't vote when female and male meant to include people who identify as such.
Yeah.
And so you're changing the meaning of a term or language that we've used for a millennial on these terms. So I always argue that can be argued under the First Amendment as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right on that. The example would be if I told you that I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, you might just roll your eyes and say, George, you're not Napoleon, you're George.
I knew Napoleon Bonaparte, and you, sir, know Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, would it be right for me to have a law passed that say that everyone has to call me Napoleon or Emperor?
Or making it a crime or at least a civil offense if I don't refer to you as that.
Yeah.
And that's in essence what we've seen done.
Exactly. I think free speech says you can be like, I'm not going to go with the Napoleon stuff.
Yeah. And or that I need to address you. Now, I'm okay, and I think it's if somebody is identifying as a male or a female and they're biologically the opposite, and they would like that, I think it's okay to do that, but I don't think you should be forced to. Yeah. And again, you're indulging into their situation.
Yeah, you make a very good point, because freedom would suggest that if you want to wear a dress and dress like a girl and say you're a girl, you can do that. But they want, and I'm okay with that. So I'm interested in putting absolutely zero resources into forcing them to dress the way I think they should dress and behaving the way I think, but at the same time, so why can't they just agree that I get freedom too?
We do have to take the break. We're against the clock. Hard break here, folks. Stick with us. Back in 2 and 10. Sorry,
I wasn't watching the video. Sorry, that was my
time now for the forecast from the Boston Independence Group Weather Center. Call Jerry Doherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
Meteorologist Vicki Graffin here for the latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. After a warm and breezy afternoon, we are going to see the clouds thickening up tonight. There will be just a couple of spot showers in the overnight hours.
Because they're forcing us to say something that we don't believe in, and we should be forced to do that, or not forced, but if we don't.
70s and breezy as well. We are watching another chance for some scattered showers to return as we head towards Friday and Saturday. I'm Vicki Graffin. You can hear Boston 25 live for the morning drive, weekdays on AM 830 WCRN.
Prevent them from going to girls' bathroom.
More live and local radio is next. Stay tuned to Radio Central 830 WCRN.
Yeah.
Having trouble with your cell phone?
She
wasn't
Wireless World.
No,
Just 57 Grafton Street.
realize that.
They fix
But it's
any
funny
device,
'cause
including
I
cell
worked-
phones, tablets, and computers,
People
as well as
have
game
been
systems.
20
Before you
years.
buy or
Yeah.
replace it, bring it to
They're
Wireless World
married.
at 757 Grafton Street.
Ming's
In Worcester. Need or want a new
And
phone?
you're
You
not
won't
sure
change the
if that's
prices
male
at
or
Wireless
female.
World, 757 Grafton Street in Worcester. Before you buy new or replace your current phone, check out Wireless World, 757 Grafton Street. That's Route 122 in Worcester.
Because the guy said Ming Wei, and they're like, oh, he's
Cuisine served
marrying
by some of the nicest folks you'll ever meet.
That was fun
is
to
at
watch.
Ziti's Italian Trattoria. It's fine Italian cooking at the Speedway Shopping Center, 290 Turnpike Road in Westboro. It's like sitting down with your family for an authentic home-cooked Italian meal. From intimate dinners to catering for events of all sizes. From
But to
pizzas and
work with so many
calzones to
people,
classic Italian
20
dishes.
years with people
Every
like
meal
that.
at Ziti's is one you'll remember. Head on down to Ziti's, 290 Turnpike Road in
married.
Westboro.
That was always interesting. All right, folks, welcome back to the second half of the Tuesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Of course, you can join the conversation for the remainder of the hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. That will get you into the studio for two-way talking conversation. Ted A is behind the glass back at HQ flying the board. As I'm broadcasting from Washington, D.C. today, I am at the Frontiers of Freedom Institute's TV studios in D.C. And along with me in studio, as you can see, if you're watching in the streaming, which you can do on multiple platforms, Facebook, X, Twitch TV, LinkedIn profile, and Rumble as well. And I know most of you do watch it on Facebook, but you can do that either at the station's Facebook page, AM 830 WCRN, or my Facebook page. My social media is Joe Mangi Show, MANGI Show. All right, 508-871-7000. George Landreth in studio with me, president of Frontiers of Freedom, as we established since about 99. The organization's coming up to 30 years. Senator Wallop from Wyoming, friend of Reagan, and he really wanted to. And I love the fact that, you know, I mean, three terms in the Senate is 18 years. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, in my opinion, I believe that's much longer than our founding fathers thought, right? They didn't put a time limit or term limit, I should say, on members of Congress, nor the president initially, right?
Yeah,
we had to have a constitutional amendment to do that.
Right. And what we had as a tradition, because of George Washington, there was nothing in writing that said a president can only serve two terms. But every single president from George Washington all the way to basically 1930, so a very long time, you know, essentially almost 150 years, agreed to follow the tradition set by George Washington, which was serve 2 terms and go home.
Yeah. And at the time, you know, George was very conscious, George Washington, that is, was very conscious about the fact that they did not, or we did not want to create an offshoot of a monarchy, that this is what we just had a revolution about. And that, and even, and George, you are the constitutional scholar in the room, but, you know, there was even, as a new nation, in the birth of this nation, you know, what's the etiquette? What do we call the president? And you know, and then of course, obviously, we settled on Mr. President.
Because Washington they had all kinds of things. Some people suggested calling him Your Highness, and he said no can do.
Sounds way too much like a monarchy.
Yeah, and then others said, how about Your Excellency? And he said no. And you know, because he wanted the nation to be different. Because actually, the president, if you look at the Constitution, his executive powers actually mirror, in many regards, many of the powers of the Stuart kings. Mm-hmm. And that you know, things like a veto power, things like, you know, certain appointment powers, those kinds of things. But what Washington was saying, and he wasn't opposed to that, he supported the Constitution. But his attitude was, sure, they have those powers, but not for life. And we're not going to treat them like a king. We're going to treat them like they are servants of the people. And so that tradition was created, and I think it's really powerful. And it makes me respect him a lot, because ask yourself, how many people in history had the kind of power and influence that he had? And because he had, for example, soldiers that came to him and said, let's march on Philadelphia and take over, and then we'll crown you king. And he didn't say, well, guys, I really appreciate that, but I'm not sure that's a good idea. He said, absolutely not. Your idea fills my heart with abhorrence. Mm-hmm. That's disgusting. have you no idea what we've been fighting for? And so the point was, he was a very principled man, and he wasn't interested in promoting himself. He was interested in promoting the nation. And that's unusual.
Yeah. I mean, thank goodness he had that type of fortitude to do that. Right, because he could have been a third-term president easily, and for him to have the foresight and the ability to say, "No, 2 terms, that's it, we're done." But there were a lot of other things that had to fall into place too, right? What do we call the wife? What do we call? Obviously, we settled on first lady, and the first family, and that kind of thing. But this was all etiquette that didn't exist because this form of government didn't exist. So it's fascinating to watch all that, and even right down to, what do you do when they walks in or they leave? Again, you don't want to mirror monarchy in these ways. And I believe one of the stories I read was, the first entertaining that the Washingtons did as for First Lady and President is it was Martha who had to negotiate this. And Washington wanted to retire. He wanted to call it a night. So she took it upon herself to stand up. And of course, when she stood up, everybody quieted down and drew attention. And she said, I got to paraphrase, but something to the effect of and I think she still referred to him as a general at that point, right? So she did anyway, which now etiquette says you can refer to the president at the highest title they had before becoming president. But she said the general often likes to retire at whatever time it was, and I usually precede him by a few minutes, and exited the room, which signaled the whole room to say goodbyes, that in other words, General Washington or President Washington wanted to retire. So it's interesting. I find the historical parts of this and how we came to have this stuff is pretty interesting.
Yeah, like he wouldn't have tolerated people bowing to him because that was the norm. If you would bow to the king or queen, but his view was, no, you're not going to bow. If you want to shake my hand, that's fine, but you're not going to bow.
Absolutely. And where was, and I don't want to get you on the spot here, but where was the original, before the White House was built, the residence? Where did they operate on? Do you know?
That's a very good question. I don't know. I think they just, he may have had a temporary, just some place that he could live. Maybe he, had a place he rented because, Mount Vernon in today's world is close to DC because we have cars that can travel at 55 miles an hour. But back then it would have been basically more than half a day, horse ride. So as a result, he had to have lived somewhere in the DC area or maybe just across the river. But living down in Mount Vernon would not have been practical given the modes of travel at the time.
Well, there is an interesting story about when Washington was negotiating for what would become D.C., the District of Columbia. And of course, the founding fathers very much wanted the capital of the nation not to be a state or in a state. Right. And which is why we have this unique District of Columbia, which I still don't understand the name of it. But the point is, we have the District of Columbia here at D.C. And he was negotiating with a farmer that he wanted to take this, what would become DC. And in the negotiations, this farmer wasn't impressed that it was George Washington, clearly. And during this time, the farmer made some kind of comment about you'd be nothing if it wasn't for the widow Curtis's money. So because it was Martha Curtis Washington, she was married before George and was left rather well off, which is interesting that most of our presidents have actually married up, with the few exceptions, say, Kennedy and so forth. Even LBJ, right, married BFI's heiress and that kind of thing. But he was so insulted that he left the room. He got up and walked out of those negotiations because he pointed out that he became as wealthy as he was, mostly because he married the widow Curtis. But 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. We're broadcasting from Washington, D.C. today at the Frontiers of Freedom Studios in D.C. with George Lander, the president of the Frontiers of Freedom, as a senior fellow here. And I've been honored to be here for a couple of years now as that. But I want to get back to, first of all, George, this is fascinating stuff. I'm going to have to go look up because now I'm really curious where the Washingtons lived when they were president, and exactly what it was, and of course we know a lot of the White House was built with slave labor, And
it wasn't completed until Adams was president. He was the second president.
So. Yeah, so absolutely. But that's how things came to be. But anyway, 508-871-7000. But we just saw the Pope's funeral this past weekend. And there's a lot to talk about there because there were a lot of meetings, right? The heads of state used this opportunity to see each other face to face, to have conversations, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. And of course, they criticized Trump in a blue suit, right? If that's the worst you got, we're doing pretty good. Okay, on this. But of course, it said, dark suit. Now, President Trump wasn't the only man in a blue suit, right? There were several others, including Prince William, I believe. So again, what are you latching on to something so ridiculous as that? And Joe Biden went, but what was interesting, he wasn't invited to fly an Air Force One, which would have been perfectly acceptable. But apparently Trump didn't even realize he was going there because a reporter asked him. He said, "Oh, is he here? I didn't know he was here." But was that an appropriate time to have conversations with heads of state at a Pope's funeral, or was it absolutely a very brilliant thing to do?
Well, I think it's, I think a lot of people might have just said, "Oh, I'm just here for the funeral," but I think he used the collection of people. I'm obviously not talking over the funeral or stuff, but before and after, and perhaps arranging meetings later that evening, because if everybody's in the city of Rome, they're close by. But the bottom line is, if you're able to work out and help solve world problems, when's not a good time to do that?
Well, as one of the positives that came out of this, of course, was a very good discussion with Zelensky.
Yeah.
So that again, these men are in the same room.
Yeah, I'm thinking saving lives and protecting nations from killing and violence.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's probably worthy of a discussion.
Yeah, and it seems that Putin is very open to a ceasefire right now, despite his actions in the last 7 or 8 days with the push that he had. But it's got to be taking a toll on the Russian people too, George. At this point, I'm not sure. Will Putin keep? And we know through our intelligence propaganda that he has spun this to the Russian people, the reason for the invasion in the first place and what's going on. But how long they have, remember, they're losing a lot. The Ukrainian people are or were Russian at one time, right? So the ties and the families are crossing over. And how long can mothers and fathers lose their sons before?
Yeah, you make a good point, because they've had literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths in the Russian armed forces. And it makes them pretty unpopular, I'm thinking, because I'm thinking, if your son died, an example would be, I think when Americans died on D-Day, the American families didn't hate FDR or Dwight Eisenhower because of that, because the war was seen as totally justified and it was very important to defeat Nazism. But the question here is, the average Russian probably isn't saying to themselves, "Oh my gosh, I'm so afraid of Ukraine. It's so important we stop them." They just realize, okay, this is stupid. Yeah. And my sons are dying for no good reason.
Yeah. We're going to have to take our third and final break here on Tuesday's edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. I'm with George Landreth, and we'll be back in 2 and 10, folks. Stick with us. That's good. He's a good natural out.
Polar Park is the place to play, so treat yourself to a private suite at the best ballpark in AAA. Suite rentals are
Wrap
the best.
Up with the signs on the
private controlled
White
experience.
House lawn and just the whole immigration and
watch the game from inside of the suite or out in your seats. It's the ultimate experience for a special occasion. Visit BlueSox.com or call 508-500-8888
I'm gonna have to write a book.
to reserve your suite today.
Tom wrote a book. I wrote a children's
Kerner Logging and Land Clearing, fully equipped with state-of-the-art equipment to handle all of your lot and land clearing needs, whether it's 1 acre or 100. They regularly service customers in the local area and will travel to neighboring communities and beyond to get the job done. If you're doing new construction, renovations, or clearing land for a new development.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
Our logging and land clearing team of experienced personnel makes small or large jobs run efficiently, giving them the ability to always keep the competitive edge. They'll quote your job from small to hundreds of acres, factoring in all aspects, including the wood salvage value, if any. In addition, they have the right equipment for each size job, making for the most efficient job site possible. For every job, Perner Logging and Land Clearing makes sure the client's goals are the main objective. Call Perner Logging and Land Clearing today for a free estimate, 978-270-9916.
We're not stopping.
That's 978-270-9916.
Looking for a station that brings you all sides of the story? Tune in to 50,000 Watt Powerhouse WCRN, where the left and the right meet in the middle. Whether you lean left, lean right, or just want to stay informed, WCRN has you covered with diverse voices, lively debates, and thought-provoking discussions. From politics and health to pop culture, you'll hear it all right here. Radio Central, where opinions from both sides come together for the
morning show
that matter. From the center of the dial, the center of New England, and the center of information, AM 830, WCRN, Radio Central.
All right, folks, welcome back to the fourth and final segment here, the Tuesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Reminding you, folks, you can always watch as well as listen to my show because I do stream it on multiple platforms, Facebook, both the station and my Facebook, X, and Twitch TV. My tag, Joe Mangi Show, M-A-N-G-I, Joe Mangi Show. Also to Twitch TV later, but live to Rumble on the Joe Mangiacotti Show channel. So check that out in the streamings. Hopefully we get more and more people streaming. And we're also starting to fill the WCRN Facebook page with more content as more and more shows start to stream from our studios as well. So 508-871-7000. Sitting with me in the Washington, D.C. TV studios is George Landreth, president of Frontiers of Freedom. Let's go to the phones. Tyler has been waiting patiently. Hey, Tyler, what say you?
I say President George Landreth and the immortal Joe, Counselor not Mangiacotti. It's nice to hear your brief and factual summaries of which I appreciate. And I have two quick questions for you, but I first want to remind you when a president is in office or is taking over a new mission, in Washington State, the circumstances affect both his interactions and the outcome. His circumstances were starving, freezing to death, and hostile guns trying to kill them and hunt them down. So his self-promotion undermines the overall good. It was literally a group promotion that they literally had to survive. I mean, we couldn't really comprehend it, even talk about it. It's just words. But as President George, you had a life experience, and I know Joe did. Here's a perfect example where right now I've got a senator trying to say in California the emissions cannot be at a different standard where they have stage 1, 2, and 3 smog alerts. In D.C., a court appeal stated the Constitution does not guarantee the same degree and level of sovereignty control based upon what they call climate and geographic. And this other situation today, George, wait to hear this, and George, if you can come up with an answer, I'm willing and dying to get this problem. An $80 million jet off the back of that Theodore Roosevelt, and with the tow thing in it, they said they lost control of it and got out of the way and didn't get hit. The plane and the tow caddy went into the ocean. What the heck's going on here, man? What have we got?
All right. Well, Tyler, thank you for the call. 508-871-7000. George, what would you?
Well, of course, I think, he made some good points about, obviously that jet going off the edge of the aircraft carrier. That's the loss of pretty significant, a couple, $60 million or something like that. But they're going to have to pull it up because we don't want to leave that for our enemies to go pull out and find and then try to reverse engineer. Even if by pulling it up we can't fly it again because maybe it's too damaged, salt water.
Not the point.
Yeah,
the technology on that thing.
Yeah, it's just to protect the technology because I can guarantee you, if that aircraft carrier leaves that underwater, someone else will come get it very soon because we are the main innovators on the world that, if you look at our technology, military technology, every other country is trying to catch up. And some countries are getting closer, and we ought to make sure we pay attention to that.
And, I'm going to tie this back into our conversation on tariffs early because part of, again, the larger picture of what's going on here right now with the Trump administration and what they're doing is, and there's so much more going on than they're able to convey in sound bites, right? Or from the White House lawn. And one of that is the control of intellectual property as well. So through tariffs, we're also addressing the massive drainage of intellectual property that China has been doing for decades. They've been stealing it. They have burrowed into these universities. And this is the other thing that, has come out if you haven't been paying attention beforehand. But when we start looking at, say, Harvard in particular, with funding that's going to stop there, well, that kind of forced some of these outlets to look at where funding, and not only are places like Columbia and Harvard and other universities getting millions, in some cases billions of dollars from taxpayers, federal money, but these universities are taking in significant foreign money, George.
Yep.
And a lot of it is from China. And don't think for a moment that Chinese money comes with no strings.
Oh, yeah.
Whether even at the UPenn with the Biden Center.
Yeah.
That happened after China. There was an influx of cash from China to them. And then the Biden Center was opened or developed. Look, intellectual property has been moving out of this country and into China and even other nations, and that has to be stopped. And some of it can be done with these are trade agreements, and they're talking about, I think, inking something like 18 very shortly. They're about to release, or has that number changed?
I think that's about right. Somewhere around 20.
So the point is, it's not just the tariff rate and so forth, but there's other things connected. So Trump is using this opportunity, and he brought them to the negotiation table by slapping them with tariffs that they can't survive on. Right. And he knows that he had no intentions these are going to be forever. He did it before, remember, with France. When I forget what France did something that was stupid. And he said, fine, at midnight tonight, there's a 50% tariff on all the champagne. Well, within an hour, you had the president of France call and say, oh, let's undo this, right? Yeah. So it happens. So part of these negotiations going on with the tariff negotiations is also the intellectual property, protecting that, what they can and can't share. Now, I think it was last week, part of the show I did on was this new Information Acts that CCP put into effect. And I know we didn't talk about it, George, before the show, so I don't want to catch you off guard here, but I'm sure you know about it, where they've officially now said that all Chinese citizens, companies, and even private citizens must, by law, cooperate with their intelligence agencies if they're asked. What has virtually done is made every Chinese citizen an asset to their intelligence agency. And we have a few of our members of Congress who want to introduce, or they have introduced a bill, but they want to pass a bill that revokes or denies student visas to all Chinese students on the premise that they are spies by this law. Now, we always knew that they always were, or they were open to it, because these
totalitarian regime.
Absolutely.
That's how totalitarians behave.
And if they came here as a student, legitimate student, without being an agent of the state, the fact is, if the CCP decided they wanted this student to do something, they just tell them they have to. Their family's still back in China. Let's not forget that. And they can be, put it through difficult times to being disappeared. So this is an important part of the tariffs, by the way, and as well as changing and shaking up supply chain issues. We're, like we said, manufacturing moving to India for some of this stuff. Yeah. But we got a little bit of a glimpse into what life is when the supply chain is interrupted during COVID. And I think that was the opportunity to be the wake-up call and to kind of learn stuff. Before I forget, I didn't want to point out that, George, you are an author, and your book, Let Freedom Ring Again, and I'll hold it up to the camera for those streaming, Can Self-Evident Truths Save America from Further Decline, by George C. Landreth. And it's a fantastic read. It's a good book to take take some lessons out of it. And where is that available? With Amazon? Or?
Yeah, you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iBooks, Kindle, and basically most any place you buy books.
There you go.
Yeah.
So Let Freedom Ring. Check it out. We'll put a link on my Facebook page too to the thing. Also, where can we get a copy if someone wanted to download or read your white paper on tariffs?
Well, I think we'll probably post it up at Frontiers of Freedom's website, ff.org, shortly. I wrote it last week, and I haven't given it to our tech people to post it yet, but I think I will shortly, because I think it hopefully will help people understand a lot of the debate that's going on now, because you have some people act like tariffs are always the best thing, and sometimes people act like tariffs are always the worst thing, and I think it's a little more like, chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is not the best thing if you don't have cancer, but it is the best thing if you do. And so, you have to use it properly. And I think that's what Trump's doing. And some of it's negotiation right now. It's a tool to push people into reasonable negotiations. And because sometimes the status quo is hard to, overcome. So he's using the threat of tariffs as a way to get them to come to the table.
Absolutely. Just to shift gears for a moment, the White House, that was interesting, and that is they put up about 100 or so of these lawn signs or yard signs, similar to campaign signs, right? You stick them in the grass, but they are pictures of illegal aliens who have committed horrendous crimes, rape, sexual assault, murder, battery. It's like the baseball card version of horrible criminal alien crimes. And strategically, they're placed so that when you do a live shot, they're going to be in it. And for those that don't know, and you can explain this better than me, George, is there are a series of these tents for the networks to be out there, and they take these live shots. Well, they put these signs up, and some did their live shots. Some of the outlets like CNN, MSNBC would blur. So get this. They're blurring the faces of people who have been charged and convicted of some of the most horrible crimes that society has. Why? Is it the anti-Trump feeling on this? Why would you blur the pictures?
Yeah.
And this is all public information, right? They have mugshots. They're in the papers. You can look it up. So I don't consider this an invasion of privacy. After all of us, we appear in the paper if we're charged, right? You look in the court section or the legal section of the paper. There you are. You get arrested for an OUI. You've made the paper, right? So is this a good thing, bad thing? Should they not be blurring it?
Well, I don't see why they're blurring it. I think they basically are just trying to hide from Americans that these deportations are working, because Trump has started off by getting rid of the most dangerous, the most objectionable of the illegal aliens. And it's kind of like they call this guy a Maryland man, and he was
Maryland dad.
Yeah, he's an MS-13 guy. He's involved in all kinds of criminal activity, and it's like, why is he the Maryland guy? I guess that means that Charles Manson was a California guy.
Pretty much.
It's like, really?
And I know we're against the clock, but they arrested 2 judges like within 24 hours, and this is killing me because, oh my goodness, you got MSNBC and the CNN. Oh, you don't believe this? They arrested a judge, but these are the people who were just a year or so ago were telling us and lecturing us that nobody's above the law, George. Nobody's above the law except if you're a judge.
For liberal judges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this wraps up the Tuesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Frankie Boyer is up next.
This is Radio Central, 830 WCRN.